Okay, so I just finished reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, written by Mark Twain. Didn't really know what the book was about going into it, but as I was reading it, I started looking a little further into it and found out there was some controversy centering the book. Is the story pro or anti-slavery? Was Mark Twain racist? Was the character Huckleberry Finn racist? Was the overall book just a racist book? I don't know. I don't speak for the masses, but I decided I wanted to give my analysis on the book. Huckleberry Finn has been banned in many schools across America, I believe mainly because of the usage of a specific word. This I partly agree with because middle school aged or high school aged, teens may not have the maturity necessary to view this book in a deeper context. If you're just taking it at word value, you're gonna miss a lot of the other little, nuances that the book has to offer. But on the other hand, why I would disagree with, banning such a book is because it's similar to restricting school systems from teaching critical race theory. Anything that may depict this country's violent past, we're not allowed to, talk about or educate up and coming generations on. I think shame can come into play when reading a book, with such accuracy or learning about certain truths of the past, the antebellum South and the language that's used and things like that. And here's why. So for white folks who are trying to disassociate from, like the horrors of the past, whether for positive or negative intent, it becomes hard to kind of move past it when you're being reminded of those atrocities, if you're constantly hearing about it or reading about it. I understand, the sentiment of wanting to move past such a, heinous time and, trying to not to relive it. But at the same time, acknowledging that, hey, this is real, these are facts. This is documented. These things have happened. So a little bit of acknowledgement to move through it, I think could get that conversation started. So the trigger manifests itself in maybe shame or discomfort. For Black folks, the trigger may look a little different. They may feel belittled, offended, or objectified. I say they because me being a Black man, I still need to speak from an objective viewpoint. From both sides, the feelings are triggered through words or context. In Huck Finn, the N-word with the hard ER was used over 200 times. Now, I know I'm trying to keep it objective, but the first time I read the word in the book, I felt shock, annoyance, frustration. I was even a little bit offended. Okay, like what? So for the first couple chapters, every time I read the word, I would get an alarming feeling in my body as to say, they just said. To know the feeling, you would just have to think of any word that you would find offensive and put it in place of that, as if you heard someone say it. And whatever alarming feeling that you associate with that is exactly what I'm trying to describe. As I read on, the shock value decreased and I became a little more used to seeing the word throughout the book. And it kind of enlightened me to the realization of how accurate the book was. With the book being set in pre-Civil War Missouri with slave owners, this is how they spoke. And to me, this was one of the key points that I could use to defend Twain against being racist, because it's like, hey, you're a storyteller. You're just telling the story how it is or how it was. So getting a little more into the story of Huckleberry Finn, Jim was the slave who Huckleberry Finn was helping to escape. Huck Finn, or Huckleberry Finn, was the protagonist slash narrator, and to me was a very complex character. He was witty, quick on his feet, and seemed to have like an overall benevolence, in my opinion. Huck Finn formed a bond with Jim because they were residing at the same house, basically. Miss Watson was an old widow who owned Jim, and she was taking care of Huck Finn. Sparing a bunch of the little details, Jim wanted to escape to be with his family, and Huck Finn, after taking a liking to Jim, made it his mission to help Jim escape. So having compassion and empathy for Jim made it look as though Huck Finn was doing what was wrong by doing what he felt was best. Huckleberry Finn mentioned in the book that he had no interest in living a neat and clean life. So in this case, he had no interest of earning a ticket to heaven by not helping Jim. Part of his decision could have come from having no desire to make it to such a dull and boring place as heaven as he described it. Hell seemed to be more exciting for him anyway. Huck did not succumb to groupthink, bribery via religious beliefs, or societal scrutiny, which, in my opinion, scores him points on the anti-racist side. He gets a partial side eye, though, because he did not openly want to be seen as an abolitionist, which has its own pros and cons, because if you're for the cause, you're for the cause, whether you want the labels or the identification of which side. It's your intention that matters, all in all. But going back to the usage of the N-word in the book, it just reinforces the heaviness of the word still today, especially if it's used in the context to, belittle or make somebody feel like they're lesser. Huck used the word throughout the book because of, the environment he was in. He was conditioned to identify a black slave as such. Although Huck saw Jim as a human, the word itself in the book embodied ownership, inferiority, objectification, subjugation. So it just shows you the depth of the word and how it can still make you feel a certain way on either side of the fence. So my ruling is that no, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is not a racist book. I don't think Mark Twain was racist, nor do I think Huckleberry Finn, the character, was racist. I just think this is a story told from a time, pre-Civil War, where there was slavery. And of course, now that things are a little bit different, we can kind of see where it stemmed from and how it became what we see as racism today. There were some bonuses in the story that I want to recall that I thought could be poignant to culture. Tom Sawyer, who was another character in the Mark Twain universe, he had his own book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which I have not read yet. I think I will. He kind of had a little bit of influence over Huck Finn. He was the, let's say, adventure junkie. Huck Finn was often pondering about how Tom Sawyer would have done things, or if Tom was there, the plan would be so much more elaborate and things like that. So when Tom finally arrived to help Huckleberry Finn help Jim escape, he knew that Jim was already free because Miss Watson had passed away, and in her will, she had set Jim free. Tom had this information. So when he shows up, instead of telling the captors like, hey, Jim is a free man, let him go, he wants to make it into a game. So because he holds influence over Huck Finn, Huck goes along with the plan, whatever Tom wants to do. Tom read all these adventurous books and he wanted to make things interesting. He wanted to make it a real prison break. And so he comes up with an elaborate, dangerous, drawn-out plan to help break Jim out. Again, instead of just telling the captors that he's free, choosing thrills over another human being's freedom. This is analogous to some of the aspects of what we see in white privilege, right? You don't have to worry about the fight, so you can go over here and play with my freedom just to make it more exciting for you, because you don't have to worry about not being free. So I think it definitely has a parallel to some of the elements of white privilege. It's not a game when you got to fight to be free. Next topic was the Grangerfords versus the Sheffersons. I don't know if I'm saying the names right, but this is basically a feud similar to the Capulets and the Montagues and Romeo and Juliet. So there was a portion in the book where I believe it was Buck Grangerford telling a story about, you know, how the feud started, you know, between both families, going head to head, killing each other. They would kill one of their family members, and then in retaliation, you know, the other one would get them back. So it was sounding very black on black crime-ish, except there weren't no black folks involved in these crimes. So it makes you think, why have you never heard white on white crime? You know, this isn't going to be made about race, but it just makes you ponder a bit, right? Black people were in chains fighting a whole different battle. And so while they're enslaved, you still have free white folks out here who are fighting each other over whatever it is, land, power, just whatever it is, overall hate. There was one part where he even talked about being out and seeing one of the guys from the other family and not having his gun on him. And us in the black community would call that lacking. Like if you get caught by one of your ops and you don't have your firearm on you, that's called lacking. I thought this was important because it showcases the general violent nature of humans, not black people, but human beings. It's just, I don't want to say it's innate, but it's just it's a human thing, not a black condition. The term black on black crime became hyper sensationalized to paint a narrative. Statistics show that violent crimes are majority intraracial, so they're more likely to happen with someone of the same racial demographic because of proximity, whether you're white, Mexican, black, Irish. It somewhat exposes a double standard in modern day America. I just want to applaud the authenticity of the language used in the book and the dialogue. Huck Finn, the way he spoke, took me a while to get used to understanding what he was saying, and especially with Jim, the way Jim was talking, you know. They had him actually talking like, you know, a slave would have talking, you know, as you're reading it, some of the language, it was, you know, like, what's we gwine do, and, you know, stuff like that. So it was very interesting. And just the overall, like, just the ignorance. But again, it made it authentic. So like, you know, referring to one of the characters as a hair lip, and come to find out that's what they used to say about people with cleft palates. That, you know, that's just a ignorant way of saying that. So, you know, just overall, you know, it wasn't just the N-word. Again, if you want to take and pick something to be offended about, I'm sure it's in the book, but to me, it was just more about authenticity of the time. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's The Adventures of Huck Finn by Mark Twain. I thoroughly enjoyed the book.